Assemblies are created in A2+ by importing existing parts into the assembly and then assembling them. The imported parts are considered to be A2+ parts, and you can use them in the assembly without modification. But what happens when you have to create and use a part in the assembly itself? Sometimes you need to modify an existing part so that it can be assembled properly. I make furniture for fun, and I have found that table or chair legs might not be symmetrical in all orientations of the leg. This means that I have to create a new part in the assembly and then assemble it with the other parts. Let's look at a simple leg design that does not need modification to be assembled. The example on the screen shows a section of the stool where the leg design is symmetrical. There are two legs and rails are used to join them together. I'm sure you can see that I simply imported the leg twice, then rotated one leg to align the mortises properly for assembly. I was able to do this because the mortises for the leg joinery were in the same place on two sides of the leg. Now let's look at an example where we have to create a part to assemble the stool correctly. Notice how the front and back rails are lower than the side rails? The leg is designed for this, but the stool cannot be assembled without creating additional parts in the assembly. In order to assemble the stool, I need to make 3 copies of the leg, 2 of which are a mirror of the first leg and the third is rotated 90 degrees. In my workshop, I would select the inside faces of each leg and carefully lay out the mortises so they are aligned properly. In the digital world, I should be able to use FreeCAD to do this for me. So rather than create 4 different leg designs, I can use the part workbench to mirror the legs. The mirrored parts are created as non-A2+ parts in the assembly. If you like what you're watching, please consider buying me a cup of coffee. Your donation will help to improve the channel. I have created an assembly and imported enough parts to complete the front side of the stool. I have also assembled the left front leg to the top and bottom rails. You can see that the mortise on the front right leg for the bottom rail is visible, which means that the leg needs to be rotated 90 degrees so that it aligns with the bottom rail. But I can see that the mortises for the right top rail and right side rail are facing the wrong way, so that's not going to work. The solution is to mirror the right leg using the part workbench before continuing with the assembly. I'll undo the transformation first. Now I'm going to create a mirror of the right front leg around the XZ plane using the part workbench. Switch to the part workbench. Select the right leg in the model view, then select the mirror tool. Change the mirror plane to XZ and click OK. The mirrored part is graphically indistinguishable from any other part, but it has been created as a non-A2+ part in the assembly. The model view shows that the part workbench has created a mirrored copy of the right leg as a child of the original. Clue to identifying non-A2+ parts can be found in the model view. Notice how each part in the model view has an icon next to it. The icon that looks like a box with a green down arrow indicates that the part has been imported as an A2+ part. The icon that looks like the part workbench's mirror tool indicates that the part is not an A2+ part. But if you're in any doubt, click on the part and then switch to the Data tab in the Property view. A2+ parts have a section called Import Part that contains the A2+ workbench version number and an object type of A2P part, amongst other things. The mirrored part contains none of that information. I like to rename parts to make it easier for me to identify them. I find that this becomes more important if you make a number of changes to a part within the assembly because you could easily get confused. I'm also going to rotate the part to make the assembly a bit easier because I find that A2+ sometimes creates a mathematically correct assembly, but not one that is visually correct in cases where the constrained parts need to be rotated 90 degrees or more. Now I will begin to constrain the mirrored right leg to the front rail. Notice how the new constraint is at the same level in the model tree as the right leg itself. This tells me that the constraint is not attached to the leg as I had intended. More unattached constraints are added to the model as I finish constraining the leg. Unattached constraints would cause previous versions of A2+ to report an error and the constraints would often fail. In my mind, the unattached constraints mean that I haven't done the job correctly and that there may be a flaw in my assembly. I prefer to fix this because I think it makes for a cleaner assembly overall, but you could leave them there if you wish. Now I'm going to show you how to make the mirrored part into an A2+ part to help clean up your assembly. I have removed the unattached constraints for clarity. I'll select the mirrored right leg, then use the Convert to A2+ Part tool to do this. This tool hides the original part, then creates an A2+ version in exactly the same location. Again, I like to rename the part for clarity. You can see that the rotational transform I applied to the mirrored leg has not been applied to the A2 Plus version. I'm not going to rotate the right leg again because it is mostly aligned correctly and A2 Plus should get the rotation correct. I will now constrain the bottom rail to the new mirrored right leg. Notice how the constraint has been added as a child of the right leg. This means that the constraint is attached to the leg. I'll finish constraining the parts and you will see that these constraints are also added as children of the leg. I might be being pedantic, but to me the assembly is now complete and correct because all the constraints are associated with A2 Plus parts. I think that it is good practice to convert all non-A2 Plus parts. The topological naming problem can raise its head when the parts are updated in versions of FreeCAD prior to 1.0. If your constraints break during the update, then it's a pretty safe bet that the topological naming problem has affected your parts. You may have to revisit those changes to work around the problem. Check out the video linked above if you'd like to learn more about the topological naming problem. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you like this kind of video. You can also support my work by buying me a cup of coffee. You can learn more about the A2 Plus workbench by watching the top right video playlist. And you can learn more about the part design workbench by watching the bottom right playlist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.